Hi there. Can we talk about The Wolf Among Us? Released in 2013, The Wolf Among Us is a narrative-driven point-and-click video game about a grisly murder in a small, insular community inhabited by real-life fairy tale characters. You play as the Big Bad Wolf, going by the slightly too-on-the-nose moniker Bigby Wolf, as you make your way through the shady underbelly of the community you've sworn to protect, figuring out who did this grisly deed. The game itself is an adaptation of Bill Willingham's Fables, a Vertigo-published comic about a community of fairy tale characters living in New York City after being driven out of their homeland by a force only known as the Adversary. While the comic's first arc deals with a murder mystery as well, each volume expands into a variety of different genres, including coups, heists, and espionage, all the way up to issue 50, where our hero, the Big Bad Wolf, aka Bigby Wolf, confronts the Adversary and has a huge pro-Israel speech.
Ever hear of a country called Israel? Here's what you need to know
Israel
about it. A tiny country surrounded by much larger countries, dedicated to its eventual
because
total
they stay
destruction
alive
by being a bunch of tough little bastards who make the other guys
Some in
pay
the wider
dearly
world
every time they do anything against Israel. Endless cycle since the alternative is non-existence, the Israelis seem determined to keep have a lot of grit and iron. I'm a big fan of them.
Okay, first off, Big Bill, sir, ignoring everything you just said, Israel is not a tiny country with a lot of grit. It is the third richest NASDAQ country after the United States and China. Speaking of the United States, it was given $3.8 billion in 2020 by the United States, with all but 2.0% of it going to the military. And since World War II, the United States has granted more financial aid to Israel than any other country. If you want to get down to brass tacks, Israel is an apartheid state in which all but 6 months of its 73 years as a country has held military rule over some portion of Palestine. It maintains absolute control of not only the movement of Palestinians, but goods as well, limiting access to water, electricity, and even cinnamon. And at the time of this recording, Israel's COVID-19 vaccination rate is 61%. While their strict embargoes on the Gaza Strip has meant that only about 23% of the Palestinian population is vaccinated. Amnesty International said in 2017 that Israel must end its unlawful and cruel policies towards Palestinian prisoners. And in 2021, the Human Rights Watch released a 231-page report accusing Israel of crimes against humanity, citing the confiscation of privately owned land, devastating the economy, and forcing 80% of the population to rely on humanitarian aid, and Israel forces murdering 449 Palestinians on the West Bank from 2009 to 2021. This entire panel is a yikes. Now, for many a baby liberal such as myself, in 2006, this was a moment where I realized something was kind of off with Fables. But my present-day drunk-ass leftist self will tell you that Chapter 1 of Fables was already showing its radical, self-reliant ass.
As sorry as I am for your marital difficulties, it isn't any of my business. We can't afford to do marital counseling, and to be perfectly candid, I wouldn't allow it if we could. We barely have enough money and manpower to run the most basic of underground government services. The mundanes may look to their government to solve their problems, but in the Fable community, we expect you to be able to run your own lives. Our only concern is that you're currently in violation of our most vital law. No Fable shall, by action or inaction, cause our magical nature to become known to the mundane world. If you can't maintain a normal human appearance or purchase a concealing glamour from one of our witches, our rules mandate that you be relocated upstate to the farm, where all the other non-human fables live.
Other when did you realize Fables was sus moments include a crazy anti-choice rant.
Stop right there, Dr. Swinehart. Don't you dare finish that thought. Have you forgotten how to tell your Mundian Fable patients apart? Or do you imagine I've gone native? Since when is our happiness of primary consideration? Some of us are still governed more by duty and responsibility. Don't bring it up again, Doctor, if you want to remain part of Fabletown.
Complaining about the welfare state.
If Mundy loses his job, there's welfare. If Mundy gets sick, all he has to do is show up at the nearest hospital where he can't be turned away because medical help is mandatory. If Mundy's not able to get into the school or sports event or social club he wants to join, he can sue. And his government will force the offending institution to open its doors to him. Even if he spills a cup of coffee on himself, he can sue for $1 million.
Oh, I get it. You're referring to that lady who sued McDonald's only after they refused to cover her medical bills to treat the third-degree burn she'd acquired on her vagina. That's hysterical. Weird views on bisexuality.
Do you think I share your son's bed only because it happens to be just right? I do it because it's a vital and powerful political statement. It symbolizes the fact that we're all equal. There is no superior species. Bear, human, or hedgehog, it can make no difference, even in our most intimate lifestyle choices. Or we're all oppressors.
And, holy shit. Oh, yikes. I'm not even having anyone voice that. Oh. But look, I get it. Fable started its run in July of 2002, less than a year after the United States had invaded Afghanistan and was gearing up to start their invasion of Iraq. The post-9/11 world was disorienting and confusing. We were all baby bipartisan liberals or just getting out under thumbs of our conservative families. There's, very frankly, a lot we didn't really notice outside of W bad. But the truth is, the world of Fables was a conservative power fantasy, on par with a Ben Shapiro novel. And it was more interested in telling the story about its main protagonist, Bigby Wolf, and how he was totally the coolest and most awesome guy ever, who would have totally huffed and puffed the Capitol down on January 6th. It's not interested in telling a story focusing on the social struggles and dynamics of living in a strict underfunded community of haves and have-nots, and what those who fall through the cracks have to do in order to survive. And I'm honestly not super interested in doing a video on this comic because I have not read it since like 2007. I don't have the time, finances, or energy to reread it. And if we're going to be very honest, I don't like to talk about stuff I exclusively hate or have a huge problem with, despite how this might actually help me get more than 5 views per video. But I do feel that its video game adaptation, The Wolf Among Us, is a very good, if not flawed, adaptation of a very problematic comic book. And I feel it warrants discussion. So, as someone who was a huge comic book nerd from 1999 into around 2008 or so, many comics of this era were a product of their time and aged about as well as anything else you would say was a product of their time. Many had the shock value and edgelord humor of a 13-year-old boy who just discovered dead baby jokes and had their TV adaptations modified to better quality. Some did not hold up at all once you realize that maybe your critique on the patriarchy accidentally reinforced harmful TERF notions, or maybe your stuff was fine. You just might have had a history of being rather disrespectful to all those barely legal girls you were using your fame to hook up with. A few adaptations of comics from this era are either around or in the works, but Fables was just never able to get any sort of adaptation, despite being put into development for both NBC and ABC. Gee, turns out when fairy tales are public domain, you can just kind of make your own Fairy Tales Real show without buying the rights, huh? And along comes The Wolf Among Us, a video game adaptation of Fables produced by Telltale Games, a San Rafael video game developer best known for point-and-click narrative games based on already existing properties. Their most iconic one, The Walking Dead, being their first breakthrough game in 2012, making an estimated $40 million in revenue. The Wolf Among Us followed up in 2013 to be a huge critical acclaim and selling 1.5 million copies on Steam alone. And while I would recommend playing The Wolf Among Us just for its very solid storytelling, gameplay that at the time was very unique, and some fantastic voice acting, Adam Harrington is fantastic as Bigby Wolf, with a great balance of gruff detective with enough range to convey kindness and even vulnerability in key scenes.
I just want you to be careful. I almost lost you once.
I'm not yours to lose.
I see you all going, well, Emma, surely you're not doing a video essay on a nearly decade-old game because it's kind of fun, and you might have a thing for hairy wolfmen. And you are correct. I am doing this video because I find myself absolutely fascinated with The Wolf Among Us. because it's the closest the Fables franchise ever gets to addressing the social disparity and injustice of the world it takes place in. These themes hit harder now, especially since the pandemic has exacerbated these already existing problems. I usually don't do plot summaries because I feel you all either know what I'm talking about or my video essays can stand on their own, but I feel it's worth it to do a small recap of the game for those of you who have not played it since it came out back in 2013. The Wolf Among Us takes place in the 1980s in a small community of fairy tale characters who refer to themselves as Fables, who have been run out of their homeland and must now live in a society. The Fables who either look or can pass as human live in New York City, while those who cannot pass as human, usually due to how expensive spells or glamours to make them appear human can be, must reside up on the farm, a rural and underfunded community living in upstate New York. You play as Bigby Wolf, the big bad wolf, who acts as sheriff to the denizens of Fabletown. His jobs include threatening to send non-passing humans to the farm, breaking up domestic disputes, and simping for Snow White, the assistant to the deputy mayor, Ichabod Crane. The murder of two sex workers, Faith and Lily, brings Bigby into the not-so-happily ever-after side of the Fabletown community, full of pimps, predatory lending, human trafficking, and Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Look, I never said this concept wasn't over-the-top ridiculous. Eventually, thanks to the help of another sex worker named Marissa, Bigby discovers that Ichabod Crane is about to get whatever the word for Me Too'd was in 2013 and gets utterly wrecked by Bloody Mary. Is this how people feel when they're trying to explain the plot of Kingdom Hearts? Bigby realizes that the ribbon all the sex workers wear keep them from disclosing what has actually happened to the other girls, and learns that the Crooked Man, a loan shark, is responsible for their deaths. After a really cool fight scene where he turns into the agent Scully Wolf from Princess Mononoke, you're given the choice to either kill the Crooked Man or take him to Fabletown for a trial. Either way, Narissa shows up, now freed from the ribbon curse, and tells everyone that the Crooked Man was indeed responsible for the murders. Bigby can either have the Crooked Man locked up or goes beast mode, wolf mode on his ass. Either way, he meets up with Narissa, who reveals that she lied about the whole thing, and she might actually be Faith. Dun dun dun. The end. Okay, now we can talk about themes. Bigby Wolf is a compelling character who beneath his gruff exterior is a literal wolf, and beneath that is someone who's struggling to be the role of authority and justice despite having a whole history of eating grandmas, children, and other farm animals. While he has been granted amnesty, there's a huge distrust and often fear among the Fables, and one of the big, bad conditions of Bigby's amnesty is he is never allowed to the tasty, all-you-can-eat buffet that is the farm. Bigby is a huge-ass archetype and a bit of a Mary Sue, but it's in that cool Wolverine anti-hero way. Before all the protagonists we enjoyed were either self-absorbed narcissists or quippy man-children. The alpha wolf, if you would. Okay, so the alpha wolf thing was entirely disproven. Wolves don't have alphas. They're actually family groups with a mommy wolf and a daddy wolf leading the whole family. Is Bigby daddy? There's a whole lot of weird-ass conservative romanticism with Bigby. His position as sheriff in the very American term of the word. The fearless cowboy bringing law and order to the lawless land. This completely ignores the horrific and racist history of sheriffs in the United States. Even to this day, the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department has within it 18 deputy gangs, literal gangs, whose acts include raiding homes without warrants, detaining and beating prisoners, and retaliation of even fellow members of the LASD who speak out against them. Despite the title, most of Bigby's job is that of a detective, akin to the classic noir films, including lots of smoking, an office dames can walk into, and like all good detectives, tampering and mishandling evidence. Bigby put some fucking gloves on. But sometimes Bigby struggled to be a big, good wolf. Bigby is held back by the fact that, as a million other YouTube videos have rightfully pointed out, Telltale Games don't actually have choices. As the better point-and-click video game about a smelly detective who randomly steals people's clothes would ask, what kind of cop are you? Do you want to attempt to do good for your underfunded and overlooked community and make amends for the horrors you committed while you were a heckin' bad wolfer? Or are you using your authority to terrorize the helpless, brutalize anyone you dislike, and indulge your inner animal? Because as your waifu Snow White says, you like it when you don't have to pretend anymore. Well, it doesn't matter because there's very little consequence to abusing suspects, helping out sex workers, stealing money, or being nice to children. With a few small exceptions, at the end of the day, the ending is always the same. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? All of society. The throwaway joke is right. Grendel won't remember this. Compared to books or movies, video games are a very new medium, and in the early 2010s, there was a push to consider them as art. Now, for anyone who says video games are not art, I see you, I hear you, but have you considered that Roger Ebert would have considered video games art if only he'd lived long enough to see this? For those who do say video games are art, I say then, like all good pieces of art, they must be looked at critically. And this means that sometimes people are gonna say, hey, a lot of these video games have sex workers as characters who you can beat up. Sex workers in real life face a 75% chance of violence, with that percentage rising with sex workers of color and transgendered sex workers, with the majority of assaults unreported due to fear of facing arrest themselves. Even reported attacks on sex workers often go uninvestigated. No one is saying if you play violent video games and do violence at a sex worker, you'll go out and do that in real life. But it does normalize the idea that sex workers themselves don't have value and are disposable, which in turn can easily shape how you view sex work, which does not just mean prostitution, it can mean being a stripper, a dominatrix. OnlyFans reported a 75% increase in April of 2020, just as mass layoffs were starting as many people were now in need of a new form of income. Sex workers are human and deserve the same level of respect, finances, and safety as any other job. So I want to make this clear that in 2013, when we were all starting to look critically at these aspects in games, The Wolf Among Us portrayal of sex work was surprising. Despite the first scene in this game involving a sex worker being brutally attacked, the sex workers you meet in this game are fully realized characters. Not just NPCs you can have sex with who will give you a discount because you're a Sigma male. Nor is there any option to brutalize them. In fact, there's a lot of options to go out of your way to help them out. Bigby Wolf, a woman respecter. Which is not to say this game handles the idea of sex work with perfect respect and nuance. Stacey Henley, in her article on sex work in thegamer.com, said,
"We don't typically see life through the eyes of a sex worker. Instead, they exist as creatures to be looked at, usually placed into violent or humiliating situations, often both. This is true of sex workers and most other types of media, and in something of a self-fulfilling prophecy, informs the violent and humiliating attitudes towards sex workers many people still hold."
And she rightfully says this about The Wolf Among Us.
The Wolf Among Us, for example, deals in protecting a sex worker from harm, and does attempt to plunge beneath the surface in showing the effects of this violence. But there's still an indelible line between being a sex worker and facing constant threat of harm.
For all its sympathies, The Wolf Among Us still portrays sex work as a demeaning and degrading job that puts innocent women at risk for exploitation, assault, and death. It shows sex workers as victims of violence, poor creatures forced into this life rather than fully autonomous characters with complexities or even empowerment. It's worth noting that Faith, Lily, Vivian, and Narissa are all original characters who were written exclusively for this game, whereas characters who already exist in the comic and are good women like Snow White and Beauty are not prostitutes. Beauty just works the desk at a shady sex motel. Yeah, that's the ticket. At the end of the day, The Wolf Among Us is still a neo-noir story and still falls back on the neo-noir tropes of the victimized sex worker, and the focus of the story is still on the gritty, hard-boiled detective. As someone who was very intensely into Fables for a very long time, it's always frustrated me because the franchise has such a unique premise that draws you in and creates an intense hyperfixation and a lot of Bigby Wolf fan art. But its creator isn't interested in the ramifications of such a world, or the premise, because when Bill Willingham isn't writing articles for Breitbart, he's more interested in Bigby explaining why Israel is cool and good. Well, Mr. Willingham, sir, Israel is not cool and good. But you know what is? Social safety nets, which Fabletown does not have. When you look at The Wolf Among Us as a dark story about a failed community where the rich and powerful can exploit, overlook, and manipulate the desperate and underpowered, it is honestly really good. One of my favorite things in video games is just walk around and look at all the stuff. I believe this is called narrative design. Yeah, so narrative design is really, really good. I replayed this game the day after I got back from a trip to New York, and it does an amazing job of conveying the grittiness to fit into this like little neo-noir story. But it's a video game, so narrative design is also like looking at all the things to tell you about the world, and a lot of this world is just like really sad. Look at the mayor's like Fabletown office, and just like full of like whimsy, or Beauty and the Beast like really high apartment. And look at how that clashes with the Trip Trap bar, the Pudding and Pie strip club. I know. I promise you, this game is good. It is. Even the random notes and info showing a community that's designed so the rich and powerful can get anything they ask for, while everyone else without that level of power just slips through the cracks. For a game that came out in 2013, I find a lot of the themes of broken and non-existent social systems very timely. As of 2018, 27.8 million Americans do not have health insurance. American life expectancy has been falling since 2014, and in January of 2020, prior to the COVID pandemic, compared to other peer nations, the United States had one of the highest numbers of hospitalizations for preventable causes and the highest rate of avoidable deaths. Even now, as I'm typing up this thing, the Supreme Court blocked Biden's eviction moratorium last month, and 3.5 million Americans now face eviction. When I play The Wolf Among Us, I don't see a cool power fantasy about a self-reliant and Reaganomical community powered by liberal tears. I see a video game about our own failing social system. Can't huff and puff away the United States infant mortality rate, Bigby. Even characters such as Snow White, who express regret for not being able to help her fellow citizens, still has her hands tied. And by the end of the game, there's still a long line outside her office that those with wealth and power can once again disregard. Structural change cannot be undone by one individual, no matter how well-meaning. To pull us all back to the start of my video, Snow White in that first issue rants about the welfare state. But not only can programs like simply giving people a home give people dignity, shelter, safety, and the mental stability needed to get clean from addiction or to help with their mental illness, it can actually save money. To be fair, I feel like people who complain about stuff costing them money don't actually care that much if there's a money-saving solution that can make people's lives better, but I do like using research in my videos on violent cartoons from Japan and video games about daddy detective wolves, so I like to point that out. And this isn't something only found in scary socialist countries, like in Finland, which has the lowest homeless population in the EU. Conservative state Utah's program to give homes to the homeless actually saved the state $8,000 per homeless person, and the homeless population has drastically declined. Medicare for all in the long run would actually cost people less. Look, I'm bad at numbers, but look at all these people who did separate studies, and they're all saying that it turns out Medicare for all would save us money. That's really cool. My friend Beatrice sent me this one. It says Medicare for all would save us $600 billion a year. Democratic socialist countries that offer universal health care, paid maternity leave, and other strong government welfare systems not only mean people tend to be happier in these countries, they also have a longer life expectancy, higher education, and dramatic lower poverty. What the fuck? This was written in the 1980s. We've known for 36 years? You know what? I don't even know how I'm trying to explain this stuff would save the US money. We just gave $3.8 billion to Israel. We have this money. All right, new drink. In 2019, The Wolf Among Us 2 was announced, which was a little odd, as in September of 2018, after years of crunch culture, last-minute rewrites to nearly finished games, bad reviews, and what employees called a culture of fear of demotion or being removed from the project, Telltale Games announced their closure, laying off 90% of its workforce with no notice or severance, leading to a class action lawsuit which was dismissed in 2019 due to the arbitration agreement that Telltale Game employees had signed, preventing them from filing a class action lawsuit against the company. Telltale Games is now owned by LGC Entertainment, who has offered the former staff to return to work for them in temporary gigs in San Francisco, a city whose cost of living is 80% higher than the national average. Also in June of this year, it was announced that Bill Willingham would be returning for more Fables, which had concluded back in 2015. I literally just learned this 2 nights ago when I was outlining the script and may or may not have been searching for Bigby Wolf related content on DeviantArt. So what do I say to all this? No, I say, no more. No more Fables. Mankind has suppressed the need for more Fables. The Wolf Among Us is a really fantastic and fun video game, and it touches a lot on surprisingly relevant social issues. And I've wanted to talk about it for a long time, but video games since then have told even stronger stories about class inequality. Disco Elysium, which is one of the best RPGs ever, full-on tackles the problems of capitalism. You literally have the option to become a communist. Bigby Wolf would never. And also he would be dead of COVID by now, because you damn well know Fabletown did not have any fucking COVID-19 restrictions. Snow White ain't fucking paying people to stay home. The comic will just continue to be a weird-ass Reagan wet dream, and Bigby being wish fulfillment, and probably a lot worse now given the huge reactionary push that has happened now that we as a society have started to become more aware of social injustice and have pushed harder to protect the rights of the marginalized. Gee, will there be a really funny scene where Bigby Wolf complains about pronouns in safe spaces? Maybe he will say he identifies as an attack helicopter. The Wolf Among Us never really had a chance to truly address the neoliberal hellscape that is Fabletown, but I'm always amazed at how close it gets and especially how well it's aged in a post-2020 landscape. When I replayed it for this video, I was originally very fearful that it wouldn't hold up, that I'd have to scrap this whole video and just pull something out of my ass, like why American Pop is good actually. But despite its shortcomings, it's a game that really showcases the strongest aspects of Fables without the huge, glaring problems that the comic had. It's still available for purchase, and it's a gem in both Telltale's quality at the height of its fame, and also a story about how even the big bad wolf could benefit from a stronger social structure. That's all for today. Thanks for letting me talk about The Wolf Among Us. Hi my dudes! Thank you so much for checking out this video. I wanted to make something with a spooky theme for this time of year, and what could be spookier than big bad wolves in democratic socialist countries. A huge thanks to my patrons in the credits for their support in helping me make these videos. And a special thanks to my big spender patron, Kurt Schuller, who requested I say, Adventure games are back, baby! Arr! If you would like your name in the credits, special shout out, sneak previews, cute animal photos, and more, please subscribe to my Patreon where as little as $2 a month can get you all sorts of wonderful content. You can also make a one-time donation by buying me a coffee, links in the description below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks again for watching. I'll see y'all soon.